get started. Thank you very much for joining us today. First and foremost, I hope that for everyone on this call that you and your loved ones are safe and well. Thank you for joining us for a really important discussion for which we have a terrific set of experts to help share their experiences. My name is Rob Bradley. I'm the Knowledge and Learning Director for the NDC Partnership Support Unit. We're going to talk in just a little bit more detail in a moment about what the NDC Partnership is and how we work. But we are a coalition of now over 110 countries and around 70 international institutions. And we support countries in advancing the implementation of their NDCs and enhancing ambition over time. And we do that on a wide number of issues, and we benefit from the extraordinary range of expertise that our different members and external partners bring to these different topics. We run a number of discussions that are about the kinds of things that countries are requesting of us. This one is a little unusual in the sense that I think we're going to look at the kinds of requests that we do get from countries, but also reflect on the fact that perhaps not as many requests are being made or not being made in quite the way that we would anticipate. Given the importance and the universal support around taking nature-based solution approaches. And we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about what might be done about that and what can be done to help countries advance these kinds of solutions most effectively. If we could move to the next slide, please, Jamie. Nature-based solutions, as I say, have, at least in principle, almost universal support. As we know, we're up against multiple crises, and of course, not just the COVID crisis that is keeping us all tucked away at home right now, and the imminent climate crisis, on which, of course, the NDC Partnership's work is focused, but multiple crises affecting the natural world as well. Levels of extinction, pressures on a whole range of different ecosystems in ways that all combine to magnify the impacts both on natural and human systems. And so it is imperative that we find ways to advance both the protection of these natural systems and their flourishing and the mitigation of the climate crisis in a way that provides a sustainable pathway forward for both human societies and for the planet. And the natural systems on which we all depend. So nature-based solutions are emphasized by many of the countries and many of the organizations we work with as of central importance. And we're going to be examining those in some detail today. I'm going to hand over in a moment to my colleague Talia Chorova, who is the research specialist at the NDC Partnership Support Unit. She, together with our colleague Catherine Lee, has been analyzing the kinds of requests that we have been receiving within the partnership and the kind of support that's being delivered against those requests, and is going to give an overview of where we stand on those. We then have two really interesting country presentations, first from Aria St. Louis, who is the head of the Environment Division for the government of Grenada, and Ehab Eid, who is IUCN's SSC steering committee member and a biodiversity expert in Jordan. We're then going to hand over to a panel of experts for a discussion of some of the issues being raised, include Maggie Comstock, Senior Director for Climate Policy at Conservation International, Matthias Bertram, Advisor for the International Climate Initiative Support Project on the new Global Biodiversity Framework at GIZ, Margarita Gutierrez, Deputy Director for the Nazca region for the Nature Conservancy, and Sean Martin, Senior Director of Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience from the World Wildlife Fund. And that session will be moderated by Daniel Plüger, who is an advisor at GIZ. What we're trying to do with this webinar is really threefold. One is to share the trends that we are seeing in nature-based solutions work through the NDC partnership on both the implementation of the NDCs as they stand and on enhancement of ambition based on what we're seeing requested from countries and delivered in support from members. We want to share what the challenges are and what good practices we see for the inclusion of nature-based solutions in NDCs from countries and implementing partners, and to share guidance, recommendations, and resources from our expert partners on planning, enhancing, and implementing NDCs to include nature-based solutions. We're very lucky indeed to have such a distinguished expert panel with us today. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Talia, who will walk us through the first presentation of today. Talia, over to you.
Thanks so much, Rob, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Jamie, could you please advance the slide? Again, I'm Talia Chorover. I'm a research specialist with the NDC Partnership Support Unit. And before we hear from our main speakers and panelists, I'll just give a quick overview of nature-based solutions in the NDC Partnership's work. As Rob mentioned earlier, the NDC Partnership is a global coalition of countries and institutions collaborating to drive transformational climate action while enhancing sustainable development. Next slide. The NDC Partnership was created to support countries in planning and implementing their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. The partnership is currently comprised of 110 countries and 68 member institutions, and these numbers are continuing to grow. The partnership operates by matching country need for climate mitigation and adaptation action with support from our institutional partners. Next slide. So in this presentation, I'll be talking about 3 types of support requested to the partnership by countries. The first is a request for support letter, which comes at stage 1 of our country engagement work. These are requests outlined when a country first reaches out to the partnership for support on climate action. Countries also have partnership plans, which are more fully fleshed out plans at the national level for NDC implementation. And these are usually developed after a country's initial request for support letter and have a bit more of a detailed breakdown of technical assistance and project development needs matched with partner support. And finally, I'll be mentioning CAP requests, which come from our Climate Action Enhancement Package offering, which was developed last year to support countries in the NDC update and enhancement process in 2020. So this is just to give you a quick sense of the unique data sets that we're working with here. Next slide, please. So most of us are probably here because we already know about the vast potential for nature-based solutions in climate action. But just to give a quick overview, there are many cross-cutting climate benefits for including nature in national climate actions. Nature-based solutions provide complementary benefits across mitigation and adaptation. For example, restored peatlands create habitat for endangered species, improve water balance of entire landscapes while also sequestering carbon and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see, more examples are listed here. Nature-based solutions also have the potential to underpin the sustainable development goals through supporting vital ecosystems and biodiversity, maintaining access to clean drinking water, improving livelihoods, and providing sustainable food systems that translate to food and nutrition security. Right now, 130 out of 196 countries have included nature-based solutions in their first round of NDCs, and yet only 28% of those countries have included details on the scope and process of implementing their nature-based solutions actions. So the challenge remains how to encourage countries to expand the inclusion of nature-based solutions to enhance national climate efforts in a way that's detailed and measurable. Next slide, please. So now I'll dive into the nature-based solutions requests that we're seeing from countries. And Catherine Lee, who's also on this call, has played a key role in developing this analysis. Next slide. So when looking at nature-based solutions requests across the partnership, they make up about 5% of total partnership requests. Over 2/3 of our NBS requests are currently supported by partners. And nature-based solutions requests are coming from every region of the world, with the most requests coming from Latin America and the Caribbean and Sub-Saharan Africa. And now I'll show you some pie charts to show how this data breaks down across sectors, climate targets, and activity types. Next slide. So when looking at the breakdown of our nature-based solutions requests by sector, the majority fall under agriculture, forestry, and land use sectors, which is not surprising. But this also shows that there are many opportunities for linkages across other sectors such as water, waste, energy, and buildings. Next slide. So we know that nature-based solutions have cross-cutting dividends that extend just beyond adaptation or mitigation, but this graph shows the way that requests were framed to the partnership in terms of these climate targets. So as you can see, there are almost 4 times as many nature-based solutions requests for adaptation efforts as compared to mitigation-focused requests. Next slide. Finally, when we look at our nature-based solutions requests by activity type, 61% are for budgeting and investment support. Next slide. So now I'll briefly just go through a few examples of what these requests look like from countries. Next slide. Albania, for example, has requested support for mainstreaming agroforestry as an alternative to standard agricultural practices for the purposes of carbon sequestration and energy efficiency. This request is currently unsupported by the partnership. Mozambique is working towards community forest management and forest restoration initiatives, as well as developing pathways for access and promotion of alternative energies to biomass, which is currently being supported by AFDB, Germany, Spain, Sweden, and the World Bank. Pakistan, with support from the World Wildlife Fund, will be monitoring the impacts of forestry activities to quantify carbon sequestration and enhancing watershed management for biodiversity conservation. This was requested through the partnership's Climate Action Enhancement Package. After this, you'll be hearing much more on nature-based solutions in Jordan and Grenada, but just to give a few highlights here. In Grenada's partnership plan, the country is working to enhance climate resilience and conserve species and genetic diversity through knowledge exchange around afforestation and reforestation. And Jordan is looking at carbon sequestration through the conservation of seagrass ecosystems, establishing incentive programs for sustainable rangeland management, and building climate resilience through technical assistance for sustainable agriculture in rural areas. Next slide. So a few high-level takeaways from our analysis are here. Nature-based solutions requests from countries are well supported by partners, but they make up a small percentage of our overall requests. Significant nature-based solutions linkages to key sectors such as water, waste, energy, and buildings have yet to be made when looking at partnership requests. Countries are not requesting much monitoring and evaluation support, which is an area of known importance for nature-based solutions implementation, according to our institutional partners and experts. And under our Climate Action Enhancement Package, nature-based solutions are more prevalent than in our other partnership requests, which suggests a strong focus on nature-based solutions in the updated NDCs. Next slide. So thank you for listening, and I'm really excited to hear from our other speakers. I want to give another shout out to my colleague, Catherine Lee, who helped to make this analysis possible. Thanks so much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Talia. I'm now going to turn to the first of our speakers. I just wanted to mention a housekeeping note that I omitted to mention at the outset. The chat on this Zoom call is disabled. If you would like to raise any questions as we go through the session, please feel free to put those into the Q&A slot. As I mentioned, we will be having a panel discussion and question and answer session later, and I'll introduce that when we get to it. But there too, we will be using the Q&A function on Zoom to raise questions. And obviously, please, if you are targeting that question to a particular individual, please note that in the question as well. With that, I would like to hand over to the first of our speakers. Aria St. Louis is the head of the Environment Division at the Ministry of Climate Resilience, Environment, Forestry, Fisheries and Disaster Management in Grenada. Her research interests lie in addressing the impacts of climate change on island biodiversity, with an emphasis on using ecosystem-based adaptation approaches for both marine and terrestrial ecosystems. Her collaborations include multidisciplinary research, ecology and evolutionary genetics on commercially important fish species, endangered species, both plants and animals, and habitat indicator species. Aria, thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to all, and thank you very much for the invitation that has allowed me to speak on this very important topic. Thank you also for the kind introduction, Rob. I'm going to focus on Grenada's perspective on nature-based solutions in nationally determined contributions. I will first focus on the context and the issues that we are facing globally and options available. Then I will do a quick introduction of Grenada's NDC, and then share one case study near and dear to my heart where nature-based solutions continue to be effectively used. I hope to end off with brief info on Grenada's next steps. Next slide, please. So, nature-based solutions in NDCs, issues at the global scale. We have a dual biodiversity and climate crisis. This is borne out by the scientific data collected in a number of seminal reports, including the IPBES thematic, methodological, regional, and global reports, as well as the IPCC special reports on 1.5 degrees C on oceans and the cryosphere on lands. Additional information from the UNEP GAP reports, the work done by IUCN, World Conservation Monitoring Center, and countless diligent scientists show this. So the science is clear that we're in a biodiversity crisis and are losing species at unprecedented rates. It is also clear that we're in a climate change emergency, with global temperatures on a trajectory that can spell doom for many of the small island developing states and other countries. And this is why I included the photo of our islands. Sea level rise, ocean acidification, extreme weather events, and I recall here that we are now entering into our hurricane season here in the Caribbean, where above average active season is anticipated. We know that there is a relationship between biodiversity and climate change, because climate change is a key driver of biodiversity loss, and biodiversity and nature-based solutions are critical to addressing climate change. In addition to the relationship between these two, we also recognize that there is a limit to which biodiversity and nature-based solutions can address climate change. If global temperatures go beyond a certain level, and we're told 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures was seen as a critical threshold, so that if the temperatures go beyond this, we jeopardize the ability of ecosystems to help fight climate change and to provide goods and services which we as humans depend upon. So there is a window of opportunity for climate action, and we are told that this is closing. So too, the window of opportunity for using biodiversity and nature-based solutions to address climate change is also closing, with the result that we are faced with devastating impacts on nature and on people. And now, with COVID-19, we also face a health crisis in addition to the biodiversity emergency and the climate change crisis. Next slide, please. Moving from a global to a national level. Next slide, please. Grenada is a small island state with unique biodiversity based on our biogeography. Under our program of work in protected areas, the top 3 drivers for biodiversity loss were identified as habitat loss and conversion, climate change, and invasive species in no particular order. Climate impacts, including changes in the timing, duration, and intensity of rainfall, storm surge and coastal erosion, saltwater intrusion into freshwater, coral bleaching due to climate, are exacerbated by predictions of an above average active hurricane season. As such, in Grenada, we fully support the need for urgent and decisive action in the context of these global emergencies. Next slide, please. So we are in unprecedented times, and this means no more business as usual. The biodiversity science is clear and indisputable, as is the climate change science. So what are our options? Are we going to continue with gray solutions Are we going to move to hybrid gray-green solutions? Are we moving to green nature-based solutions? I would ask that we even consider and include the no regrets option, where even in the face of needing additional data, we look for opportunities where we can continue to support nature-based solutions that are causing no harm. Now I would like to move quickly on to introducing you to our NDC. Grenada was one of the first countries to ratify the Paris Agreement and submit our INDC at the time. In full compliance with the Paris Agreement, Grenada intends to submit our enhanced NDC thanks to the catalyzing power of our work with the NDC Partnership. So you will see some features of our current NDC, as well as a sneak peek at Grenada's enhanced NDC. Our current NDC includes that we are committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 30% of the 2010 levels by 2025. There are 4 main sectors for implementation under our nationally determined contributions. These 4 sectors are energy, and here we refer to electricity, transport, waste, and forestry. I also want to indicate here that Grenada's NDC focused initially primarily on mitigation action because we had prepared our national adaptation plan through an extensive consultative process in parallel around the same time. And therefore, at this time, my case study and example is more related to nature-based solutions in the context of mitigation action. Although I will reference some of our adaptation for nature-based solution, or adaptation nature-based solutions at the end. As we were implementing our NDCs in parallel, we also started the journey for enhanced NDCs. And our regional NDC partnership team have worked tirelessly with us on this. A peek at our enhanced NDC will show that we have already broadened the scope at the sectoral level to include promoting nature-based solutions even more strongly and as part of our blue economy options. Next slide, please. So nature-based solutions in our current NDC are primarily linked to carbon sinks. And here, Grenada's forests include about 4,000 hectares of protected forest, which is about 11% of the country's total land area. Restoration of upland areas and afforestation have been part of our Caribbean Challenge initiative, where Grenada had pledged to set aside 25% of nearshore marine and terrestrial areas and ecosystems they encompass as part of a managed and protected areas network. In particular, given the recent literature that indicates that seagrass beds can act as carbon sinks, Grenada has made a huge push to increase our marine protected areas, and in the last 3 years has doubled the size of our marine protected areas. Next slide, please. And this quick map of our tri-island state shows you areas that are already declared marine protected areas in red, and the soon to be declared areas which double the total amount in pink. We also have identified other priority areas which we are in the process of declaring as marine managed areas to support our implementation of our NDC. In addition, we are reaping the co-benefits to the biodiversity as well as to our targets under our Sustainable Development Goals, as well as some other regional and international instruments. So now I want to share with you one of our crown jewels, which was a pilot project, but now has been replicated in other communities. Next slide, please. So the restoration and community co-management of mangroves started off as an initiative in the northeast coastline. The socioeconomically vulnerable communities along that coastline were experiencing severe coastal erosion. And this was exacerbated by their cutting down of mangroves, particularly in the Telescope area. to sell for charcoal burning. The community themselves realized that their practices were unsustainable and approached the government of Grenada to form a partnership for sustainable solutions. The initiative involved the restoration of wetlands and replanting of the mangroves that had been harvested, in addition to fast-growing species that were planted. Next slide. We carried out training in beekeeping and harvesting of honey as an alternate livelihood, as well as capacity building in bird field identification and unique and interesting characteristics about those wetlands, so that ecotourism opportunities could be supported as part of a decentralizing of tourism that normally stayed in the southern part of the island. We worked with a community group within the community to develop their mission and vision statements in a participatory manner. Next slide. And participated in a co-management board along with them to guide management. We supported their preparation of key documents to become a registered NGO. And they actually completed the process on their own, even ahead of schedule, with over 2,000 mangrove seedlings replanted, as well as other coastal species. The management board that was established continues today, and the community members involved in the beekeeping apprenticeship program that was established have seen 3 years of yields with mangrove honey. In addition to the efforts under this restoration and management of mangroves, we also set up a coral restoration program. Next slide. This coral restoration program was set up in 2 adjacent areas with seagrass beds, but degraded coral. The coral nursery areas were set up and local fishermen, particularly the young fishermen, participated in coral training that included field identification of coral and an understanding of how reef building corals grow and how to maintain them as part of becoming coral gardeners. Through this initiative, over 1,200 fragments have been planted out by these fishermen who now consider themselves to be fishermen and coral gardeners. And they have formed themselves into an association that is now being called upon to assist with coral restoration activities in other locations. So finally, if you would permit me, we have a few lessons learned from our case studies that I wanted to share. Next slide, please. For large ocean states, carbon sequestration for marine space can be used as part of our NDCs, including our seagrass beds. Co-benefits of nature-based solutions include achieving targets under the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. As we consider nature-based solutions, we also ensure consideration of the different roles of gender, youth, and children. Grenada has long been a strong advocate of ecosystem-based adaptation so that we fully have embraced nature-based solutions for both mitigation action under our NDCs, as well as for adaptation action under our NAP. And in this light, I want to promote an integrative approach for both action under our NDCs and NAPs together. We recognize the importance of community ownership and the need to be inclusive in order to be sustainable. And given the urgency of the situation, we have placed a strong emphasis on the practical operational action and on implementation. So as I close, the next steps for Grenada, next slide please, include our enhanced NDCs with a strong emphasis on nature-based solutions. We want to increase or increased marine managed areas, in keeping with our Caribbean Challenge Initiative commitments and in synergy with other commitments at the regional and international level and with our Blue Economy thrust. I am delighted to say that Grenada is the only island included at this time in the National Ecosystem Assessment Project. This is a global project being implemented by the World Conservation Monitoring Center and Cambridge University with support from the German Federal Ministry of Environment. The National Ecosystem Assessment and Economic Valuation of Ecosystems provides very important tools to support better decision-making on the value of the goods and services provided by nature. And this value, as we have seen, is essential to combating climate change impacts. In conclusion, humans have worked with nature for thousands of years to address environmental issues, yes, but it is only recently that we have seen again considerable momentum building for nature-based solutions. And we have seen this from civil society, from the private sector, and within government at the highest political levels. Nature is our ally to combat climate change. All solutions are indeed in nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Arya. I'm going to move without delay to our next speaker. Ehad Eid is a biodiversity expert and currently IUCN Species Survival Commission Steering Committee member in Jordan. He's had several positions, and the latest is as Executive Director of the Royal Marine Conservation Society of Jordan. He's now working as an independent consultant on issues of biodiversity and nature-based solutions. He's the author of several strategies, including Jordan's National Adaptation Plan and NDC, the Third National Communication Report, and Climate Finance to Jordan. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you so much, Rob, for this kind introduction. And certainly I would like to thank all of the organizers for their invitation on this important session on the nature-based solution. Also, thanks to all of the attendants. I hope this presentation will shed the light on what Jordan has achieved so far. And I'm really looking forward to discuss any topics related to. And by the way, Jordan is also a unique country, and I'm not biased because I'm from Jordan, but because it is unique. It has different climatic conditions. So you will find the Mediterranean climate in the northern part of Jordan. You will also find the Arabian Peninsula climate in the eastern desert, and it's actually representing the majority of Jordan. And you will also find the Sudanian penetration zone, which has the same climatic conditions of the African continent. So I'm always saying that if anyone is interested to either study the climatic change on the environment or the ecosystems, Jordan will be a very good destination for that. And the opposite side. So if you would like to understand how the ecosystems are doing well and contributing to climate mitigation and adaptation, so you can come to Jordan, because you will find a variety of habitats and ecosystems. So with no more further delay from my side, I will go directly to my presentation. As I said, I would like again to shed the light to speak about what Jordan has done in this topic, the challenges, and also to give some recommendation. Can we move to the next slide, please? Very quickly and very quick information about Jordan. It is a country, a relatively small country in the Middle East with almost 10 million people. And it's considered as an upper middle income country. And according to the statistics that are circulated by the Ministry of Environment, officially, we have almost 26,000 kilotons of CO2 emissions. And for the National Biodiversity Index, it's about half recorded. Jordan has developed the vision for the nature-based adaptation. And the vision was basically to achieve a sustainable, healthy, and resilient ecosystems in the future, considering the continuous threats and other stress that are affecting those ecosystems. And for that, to achieve the vision, It has identified three main entities who will work with the Ministry of Environment to achieve the mission, the vision. And these entities are the Royal Society for the Conservation of Nature. It is a well recognized NGO in Jordan, working since 1946 on protected areas management and establishment. It is very well recognized at regional and even international level. Also working with the Royal Botanic Garden and the regional office of the IUC and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So those entities will work on the actions that are developed to increase the adaptive capacity of the country's ecosystem. Next slide, please. So if we look to the commitments, or let's say the official declarations from Jordan, we will see that the adaptation action that was set by the government of Jordan, it was composed of four main actions. The first one is engineered. Nothing was stated in the engineered part. The second one was about nature-based, and this is our topic of concern today. The third one was hybrid, which will join all of those actions together, working for climate smarter agriculture, the resilience water, the settlements, and also the urban settlements. And the last one is indirect, the adaptation actions, and this will be done through various, let's say, activities like the investments in climate change research, the community capacity building, public awareness, and the health research actions, and the livelihood. Next, please. So for the outcomes that was also set by Jordan, we will find that we are committed to those outcomes, which include that we need to increase the resilience, reduce the risks on ecosystems, to protect these from the extreme events. We need to achieve food security, water security, because Jordan is one of the countries that are facing a serious challenge in water demands over the available resources. To protect the biodiversity and ecosystems was one of the adaptation outcomes, and this is something extremely important since it means that the government of Jordan are really looking and highlighting the importance of this specific thematic area: the human well-being, the economy, the sustainable development, and here they are speaking about the green growth specifically, the livelihood security, and also to protect the national capital, the ecosystem services. And for that, the last one, there was a project which was implemented through the GIZ, funded by the government of Germany over 5 years. And the Ministry of Environment in Jordan was leading this project, and it has achieved many achievements, especially in means of raising the knowledge and awareness of Jordanians and the community about what is the meaning of ecosystem services. And by the way, just to let you know that if we translate the word services to Arabic, then it will be misunderstood, because the Arabic word will mean something that you will negotiate and you will buy and sell. So this is why I would say that this project was really important, because it shed a light on the ecosystem services, what it really means. So many of the project stakeholders who were involved into this project, they are now more knowledgeable and they understand what does ecosystem services mean, which is, I would say, it's a very good baseline for anyone who will come and build on this initiative. Next slide, please. Sorry for the many words in this slide, but I will make it much easier for our esteemed attendants. So basically, Jordan has worked with NDCs into two main, let's say, it has established for the report, the first report of the NDCs, and then there was the action plan. For the first report of the NDCs, there was two main topics that our, let's say, government and the stakeholder consultation has ended with. The first one is about agriculture and food security, and maybe in the beginning, Talia has mentioned that how much, most of the work and, let's say, interest is in the food security and the agricultural side, and this is true even in Jordan. However, there are so many other dimensions, and they were all mentioned by Talia in the beginning, that can be investigated in the future. And the second one, that was about biodiversity and protected areas. And this was, by the way, a success for us as conservationists here in Jordan to have a very specific thematic area related to biodiversity within a national report which was circulated to the UNTCC. For the agriculture, there was a huge interest for the afforestation, so there was like an indicator to make like 25% of forest areas in the rain-built areas to be planted, and also to support the friendly agricultural and permacultural designs and activities in Jordan, and also to improve the soil and the soil water storage to maximize the plant water availability and the infiltration of rainfall. For the protected areas, there was a set of actions mentioned. One of these is, to conduct or to end or to establish a comprehensive review of the national network of protected areas, because here in Jordan we have a national network of protected areas, and it is the base of how we are establishing our protected areas. And by the way, the protected areas, they are established to conserve representative samples of the ecosystems that are available in Jordan. And here where the protected areas importance can be highlighted. Then there was something related to establish a specialized unit for the adaptation strategies that will make sure to follow up with all of the stakeholders, the national stakeholders, to develop an ecosystem adaptation project. And this is something very important because it will also help in the governance part. If you would like to have a clear governance and a good governance, then you need to understand who will take the decisions and who will make the follow-up, so you will ensure an effective implementation and a very good monitoring and evaluation. Also, to have the research part and the monitoring was something highlighted, and even it wasn't away from the local community, because there was a topic or an action to enhance the resilience of the local communities. And the last one is to enhance the land use planning in order to integrate the ecosystems and habitats within. Next slide, please. Now for the action plan, which is the second component that I have mentioned at the beginning. This is very simply how Jordan government has dealt with the ecosystem adaptation. And by the way, this is one of the challenges and the recommendation that I will come for. The first one, again, is about forest restoration and protection. And here there was, they were looking how we can create more jobs. And by the way, there was a project also funded by the government of Germany through the GIZ. It's Cash for Work. And there was so many attempt to have afforestation and to create job for the Jordanian as a host community for the Syrian refugees here in Jordan. And the second one, it was about the restoration and protection of the marine and coastal ecosystem. And although it is a very tiny coastal area in Jordan, it's only 27 kilometers, but it has a super importance for Jordan economy. And there is a high interest over the coastal areas that are really very limited. So this was, by the way, when I was one of the stakeholders in my previous job as the executive director of the JERD, the Royal Marine Conservation Society. We were looking forward to have like an estimation of the carbon loss by the marine ecosystem, and to monitor this over 5 years, and also to have a detailed marine habitat map at the Gulf of Aqaba. And the last one was about the conservation of biodiversity and ecosystems, to have an improved and enhanced ecosystems in Jordan. Next slide, please. Now, looking for the challenges, I would say that the first challenge is that the nature-based solution, although it was embedded within the action plan and the report, the NDCs report, and also in other national strategies, but it is still not institutionalized in Jordan. So this is maybe the first thing that we need to look for in our future planning and implementation. We need to review and analyze the national strategies and plan, and to identify where are the targets and the indicators that are related to nature-based solution. And I have just highlighted some important strategies at a national level that should be reviewed for this specific challenge to be overcome. The first one is the NBSAP, and there is also the National Land Degradation Neutrality, the protected area plans, the national adaptation plan, the disaster risk management policies, and the climate change policy. A second challenge I would also call for is the level of coordination between the different entities whom are responsible for the NDCs, either the NDC's action plan. Because at the end, you have seen that in the current action plan, it was dealing with three major topics. However, there are so many stakeholders whom are implementing actions and activities that can contribute to achieving one of these activities. So the coordination is something very critical, and the good governance is also something much more important. The level of knowledge and awareness is still something that we need to build on. I know that there was many efforts here in Jordan, or several efforts in Jordan, but still we need to to have more of this, and of course the political will to recognize the importance of the nature-based solution in NDC's implementation. And if our political people will support, then everything will go ahead more smoothly. And certainly the financial issues and the availability of funds. Next slide, please. So here I'm just giving an example from my side how I see the future planning or the future work on the nature-based solution integration within the NDCs of Jordan. I think one of the major part is to maintain the functionality of the ecosystem and to avoid any degradation, and to have a good and a well-established restoration program and management. And then identifying the ecosystem is something also very critical here in Jordan. We have identified these before, but now we need to have a very well-established matrix to adjoin all of the ecosystems with their services they provide, and also to look for the mitigation measures or the climate-related outcomes that we are looking for. So, as an example, for the forest ecosystems and marine and coastal ecosystems, we know that there are very important carbon storage areas, and they are also important for sequestration parts. So, this, if I will look to the measure climate-related outcome, the first thing which will come in my mind is that tons of CO2 avoided or reduced or even sequestered. Next slide, please. Now, for the recommendation to strengthen the nature-based solution, and these are some of these, but not limited to. There are more, but I thought just to keep the major ones. The first one, we need an in-depth review for the nature-based actions in our current NDC's action plan, and even to get back to the report that was submitted, and to enhance the nature-based solution integration and mainstreaming within. We need also to have the nature-based solution within the mitigation and adaptation measures to set measurable and time-bounded numeric target. It's something also very critical and needed from our side. Also, we need to capitalize on the protected areas and their impact or their climate benefits. This is something will also help, especially in the adaptation part. And by the way, it's not only about protected areas in Jordan, because we have also the special conservation areas, and there's another means of conservation called the HIMA. Next is about how to identify and explore the benefits of ecosystem in Jordan. And here we can look also to the ecosystem services and the evaluation of the ecosystem services, the economic evaluation of ecosystem services in more details, how to manage the climate risk that are threatening the sustainability of climate-based solution, to adhere, of course, to the social and environmental safeguards, something also needed and recommended. And of course, this is something very, very needed, is to secure the fund to do all of those recommendations, and to ensure that nature-based solution is very well mainstreamed in our NDCs and implemented effectively. Well, I think this is should be the last slide. Am I right? Next, please. Yes. So, very quick note before I end. I think we have made a good progress in means of setting the baseline, but still we need many more to make the full implementation, mainstreaming, and also to have an effective nature-based solution into NDCs. I will stop here, and thank you so much again.
Shukran, Ihab. Thank you very much indeed. We've had We've had insights from 2 countries that are doing really interesting and innovative work in this space. And there's an enormous amount there, I think, for us to both learn from and be inspired by. I want to hand now to our panel, who are going to bring some of their expert perspectives on this set of questions. I'm going to briefly introduce everybody and then ask the panelists to say just a few minutes of opening remarks, and then we will be opening the session up for question and answer, which Daniel Plugo will be moderating. We've got an excellent, really distinguished panel for you today. Daniel, as I mentioned, Daniel Plugo will be moderating. He's advisor for the support project for the implementation of the Paris Agreement at GIZ. Maggie Comstock is the Senior Director for Climate Policy at Conservation International. She leads the institution's work to support nature-based solutions to both mitigation and adaptation within global policy frameworks. She's an expert in matters related to carbon market mechanisms. She's worked previously on the climate and biodiversity finance policy at Conservation International and has managed the organization's overall biodiversity policy engagement with a particular focus on finance policy related matters. Matthias Bertram is an advisor at the ICI, International Climate Initiative Global Project, support project for the design and implementation of the new global biodiversity framework at GIZ. His work focuses on post-2020 global biodiversity framework and the interface between biodiversity conservation and climate change, in particular through nature-based solutions. Over the last 14 years, his work has focused on nature-based solutions for climate change and disaster risk reduction, biodiversity conservation, and natural resources management, both from an adaptation and mitigation perspective, with particular regional focus on Southeast Asia and Latin America. Margarita Gutierrez is the Deputy Director of the Northern Andes and Southern Central America, NASCA, region at the Nature Conservancy. Prior to joining the Conservancy in November 2015, Margarita served as a consultant to the United Nations Development Programme. She was Deputy Director at the Institute of Hydrology, Meteorology and Environmental Studies of Colombia and Technical Advisor to the Vice Minister of Environment. In these positions, Margarita was responsible for reporting on the state of natural resources in Colombia, issued national communications to the Convention on Climate Change of the United Nations, and developed scientific guidelines for land use planning in Colombia, as well as for national GHG inventories. And Sean Martin is the acting lead for climate and energy and the Senior Director for Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience at the World Wildlife Fund. Sean provides guidance to WWF programs on becoming climate smart, making sure that they are prepared to address the inevitable consequences of climate change and their effects on biodiversity, people, and the ecosystem services that they rely on. Recently, Sean has worked with the Asian Development Bank, GIZ, and the pilot program for climate resilience to integrate ecosystem-based approaches into adaptation planning. He co-authored 2 reports on the use of nature to achieve climate goals in NDCs, enhancing national climate plans through nature-based solutions, and enhancing nationally determined contributions through protected areas. We've asked our panelists today to reflect on 3 questions. First, as countries are including nature-based solutions in NDCs, but there are challenges in translating those to concrete action, what kind of data, plans, and policies are needed? Can we speak to any best practices or lessons learned from on-the-ground projects in countries you're working in? And any comments that you have or reactions that you have to the work presented today by our country speakers and how your institutions can support countries in achieving their NDC targets through nature-based solutions. Maggie, let me turn to you first.
Thank you so much for having me. Just to start, for those not familiar with Conservation International, we're a nonprofit organization working in 30 countries around the world on policy, conservation implementation, and science. Our focus is on how to protect the nature that helps people to thrive. And we're pleased to have worked with many of the partners on this call and attendees, I see, on resources to help countries in incorporating nature into their NDCs. First is a guide for including nature in NDCs, which I'm excited to share is now available in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. And brand new, there is a new guide on blue carbon in NDCs that came out this month. Both resources explain how countries can utilize the UN guidance as part of the Paris Rulebook, as well as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. how to prepare sector-specific targets for nature, and how to improve information over time. Conservation International, as part of the CAP, has been working with the government on Liberia on their NDC update process. We've learned a lot already through this experience, and so I just want to share 3 lessons and observations with you all. So first is that we're finding that across all sectors, there's a challenge with data availability. Ideally, of course, national data would be used, but in some circumstances, global is all that's available. And having reliable country-specific data is not a one-time effort. There needs to be national capacities to be regularly producing the information, to track and evaluate progress over time. The Global Environment Facilities Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, or CBIT, is actually a really great program that has helped to build these national capacities in a lot of countries. Second, point is that there is a need to be as specific as possible in creating sector targets and plans. This gets particularly important when you get to implementation, which it's wonderful that the CAP also has a focus on implementation planning. We found that spatial mapping has been really helpful to understand where the ecosystems are that are both vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, as well as where these ecosystems can help us address climate change. We've also found that building on existing policies and strategies has been a really helpful starting point. Liberia, for example, has very ambitious targets for biodiversity, renewable energy, development, disaster risk reduction, and by starting there, mainstreaming the climate aspects has given us a good starting point. Which brings me to my final point, and I'm going to quote Aria here. Great presentation from both our country panelists, but make it an integrated approach. Ahab also highlighted this important point in his presentation as well. In the context of Liberia and in many countries around the world, an integrated approach to land management is necessary if you're going to effectively address deforestation. In order to address deforestation, you need to understand and work on the drivers, whether it's agriculture, mining, urban development. Both our country panelists highlighted marine and coastal ecosystems as key parts of their national strategies, which is fantastic given the very important both mitigation and adaptation roles of blue carbon, whether it's mangrove forests, salt marshes, and seagrasses. But depending on the country, interventions on blue carbon usually require the input from multiple ministries. Whether it depends on your country, there may be a marine authority, fisheries department, forest if it's mangroves, infrastructure for coastal resilience, disaster management. So that makes it really complicated to implement these actions for blue carbon. However, it's also an opportunity. If we're successful in mainstreaming climate and ecosystem-based approaches throughout all of those priorities, it can go a long way in making this successful and sustainable long-term. So I'm equally eager to hear from my fellow panelists. So to close, we know that enhanced action under the Paris Agreement is needed urgently. We also know the science says that we cannot meet the goals of Paris without nature. Of course, nature-based solutions are only one part of a country's full portfolio of climate action, but given the multiple benefits that nature provides, it's really time to prioritize and enhance solutions that we know are important for livelihoods, for development, ecosystem services, whether it's freshwater or biodiversity, and of course, important for climate. So, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maggie. Kept terrifically to time for my other panelists, just so that I've prepped the body language. That'll be a 1-minute warning for timing. But thank you very much indeed. Let me turn next to Matthias to reflect on the same questions.
Yes, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Rob, thank you for this kind invitation. GIZ is indeed a proud implementing partner of the NDC Partnership. There's currently 1,500 ongoing projects in 120 countries, and among them are, of course, Jordan and Grenada. So area. Nice to be in touch with you. So we are proud supporters of your countries as well. And about 50% of our projects are related to climate change and another fraction to natural-based solutions. Let me just highlight a few lessons learned from our project implementing perspective, adding to what Maggie has already mentioned, so I won't repeat the very true comments that have been already made here. What we in our projects also realize is, of course, that nature-based solution is a very important umbrella concept for various ecosystem-related approaches, among them ecosystem-based adaptation, REDD+, forest landscape restoration. So it's very important to build on these well-accepted methods and also restoration efforts. Ehab mentioned it quite nicely in his presentation, the afforestation target of 25% of barren forest areas. So you have to build on that existing targets and actions on the ground, and also GIZ has a range of knowledge products, let's say the NDC adaptation toolbox or NDC and EBA trainings, planning on the marine and coastal issues, or integrating ecosystem services, which has been applied in Jordan as well. I have mentioned it. So let's make use of that knowledge resources, because the next 10 years, they are very decisive for climate. They are very decisive for bending the curve of biodiversity loss. So we have no time to waste. Another point is making use of synergies. I mean, nature-based solutions, they have really a huge potential to link climate change, adaptation and mitigation efforts. I think Arya mentioned very nicely a project which started as a mitigation project turned out to incorporate adaptation aspects to strengthen the resilience of communities. So, and also the Jordan example on carbon sequestration targets and resilience targets, this is quite clear. We need an holistic approach. It's adaptation, mitigation, just two sides of the same coin. So this nexus bears an untapped potential, and we need to build on that in the NDC implementation and also ambition raising. Another example, what I like very much, is from Mexico, where the NDC in Mexico is also integrating EBA as a natural-based climate solution as one of 3 main pillars under the adaptation targets, but it also includes a zero deforestation target, so the perfect mixture of adaptation and mitigation. Another point, it's really time for multi-level governance systems and local ownership. This is really key. I think Arya, she made a very strong point about this, that also traditional top-down management models, they are insufficient, they are really outdated. I think this co-management approach in the RECCOMM project, you explained it as a crown jewels, and we are from GIZ very happy to have participated and supported your project together with UNDP. I think this is really an excellent case, because this project, this pursues an integrated multi-sectoral approach, linking local activities with national measures and vice versa. And also to have this co-management structure in place in Northern Telescope, and it's still working. This is really excellent news, because then you create local ownership, you give the responsibility to people and governments. They do not have the capacities to deal with it 24/7. So this is excellent. And probably another final point from my side, also looking at the time, is to find the right entry points for mainstreaming climate change and biodiversity, to find it in the right time, at the right place. And we all are victims of the COVID-19 crisis, but green recovery programs, they can really be an opportunity, job creation. I think this is what you also mentioned in your example, new jobs are created to green works. Cash for Work is another project which also GIZ supported in Jordan. ILO estimates that more than 1.2 billion jobs, this is 40% of global employment, depends on healthy environments. And COVID led to a loss of 300 million jobs. However, other opportunities like nature-based solutions, they can really be a job motor in this time. So really we have to find the right entry points for the right policies to really make nature-based solution happens on the ground. And looking at the time, this would be my last comment here. Thank you very much, and it's nice being with you.
Thank you indeed, Matthias. This is already an extremely rich discussion, and So thank you very much to all of our panelists here. I want to turn now to Margarita. I believe your old boss is now my current boss.
Yes.
Margarita, perhaps you can offer us your perspectives.
Thank you so much to the NDC Partnership for this webinar and all the attendees and my colleagues that are here. I want to start by the good practices that we have made. TNC, the Nature Conservancy, it's an US-based organization that works along the world in preserving the nature and trying to thrive nature and people together. And in Colombia, we have been working in ecosystem-based adaptation for more than 8 years now, and we are working in nature-based solutions for climate mitigation for at least another 5 years at the global level, and in Colombia we have started 2 years ago. And taking that into account, what we can rely on good practices is that we need to define priorities in a broader set, with a broader set of actors for these nature-based solutions. There are a lot of nature-based solutions there. We need to include everybody, government, public, private, local people, to identify where are the most effective nature-based solutions that we wanted to achieve and where we wanted to work all. So we made a lot of efforts on these priorities. We need to take into account, and as Matthias was saying, the different levels and the different actors in those levels. We work at the Nature Conservancy at the national level with the policy, with the sectoral policies, and with all the actors. At the subnational levels, where we have all the resources, financial resources, and the responsibilities for things so important as education, health, and well-being of the people. And we need to build a case for nature-based solutions to support better well-beings in all these. And we work, of course, as ARIA and all my partners were saying, with the local communities, because if we don't build on local knowledge and we don't have the participants of the project, we cannot implement these nature-based solutions that we wanted to implement. We also want to address the challenges. And I think that in Colombia, for example, land tenure has been a constant challenge for implementing nature-based solutions. We can develop a high potential. We have developed important models associated to the mitigation potential for nature climate solutions. However, we need to put that into place into really actual places where land tenure is a problem, and we have dealt with that with very innovative ways of making some conservation agreements and working with the people that owns or that wanted to preserve that lands. We need to build also local markets for the products that we need to, if we wanted to achieve sustainability and scale for nature-based solutions implementation, we need to develop, like my partners were saying, a new economy, and at local level is very important. We always rely on products to export for our communities and for our developing economies, but we need to emphasize on the power of the local people and the local markets to bring those agroforestry or other products that are related to nature-based solutions economy life and be part of the economies, because if not, it's not going to be sustainable. And we also need to mainstream NBS in local authorities. It sometimes is challenging to work with public institutions where a lot of people go and come after many years. We have different local partners, but I think that it's an effort that pays a lot, and that it needs to be done with patience and with constancy. And finally, I think that I wanted to emphasize also, as Maggie was saying, the integrated approach that ARIA put us into the table. I think that it's
Maggie, we appear to have lost you there. I think there may be a problem with your internet connection.
Maria.
Excuse me, Maria. Okay, we're going to connect with Maria just to see if we can overcome that that technical issue. In the meantime, Maria, you're back.
Here I am. My last message, and it's very important because we have been working in these two lines. We have been working with the public and the institutions, and also with the privates. I think that the corporates and the private needs to build the territorial vision of where we wanted to work, including the natural-based solutions into their work. And they cannot see this as a responsible of the government or the communities only. And it's very important to build a joint, and this is also related to the integrated visions, a joint vision of where we wanted to mitigate and adapt our communities and our countries with the common efforts of public, privates, and local institutions. And I think that that's my time. Sorry.
Thank you very much indeed, and great to have you back. Let me turn without further ado to Sean for his remarks.
Hi, thank you, and hello everybody. I'm Sean Martin. I work for World Wildlife Fund. You probably have heard of WWF before. We're actually a federation of 30 independent national offices around the world. I happen to work for WFUS, but we have presence in over 100 countries. On climate change, we're working with country governments to increase ambition on climate action, and while emphasizing the need to do this without harming nature, very important. And we're also advocating advocating using nature-based solutions in NDCs, and a lot of the work that I've done is along those lines. Robert mentioned that we've issued 2 reports, the latest one for the NDC partnership itself on how to integrate nature-based solutions into NDCs. And earlier last year, we also issued a report looking at how countries are already integrating nature-based solutions and specifically protected areas in their NDCs. And I mentioned this report because we looked at 159 NDCs and scored them 0 to 5 on how well they're integrating nature-based solutions in their NDCs. Only 15 countries scored 3.5 or above. Nobody got a 5. Both Jamaica and Grenada were in those top scoring countries. While countries like the US and the EU and Australia all scored a big fat 0. So we have a lot to learn from those mighty 15. So I want to congratulate our 2 speakers on that. Lots of good practices in your NDCs already. And I'm very encouraged to see that you're planning to strengthen them even further. So we look forward to seeing your revised NDCs. One of the challenges that I see with NDCs, and Ahab alluded to this in his presentation, is that nature-based solutions are great as long as they continue to work. And climate change itself is undermining the ecosystem services that we rely on to achieve adaptation and mitigation goals. And so that we really strongly advocate that countries look at the climate risks on their nature-based solutions in addition to just protecting them or restoring them. We need to manage them for the risks of climate change. Coral reefs are wonderful, but they are highly vulnerable to sea level rise, increasing temperatures, bleaching, acidification. And so how long will they last as a viable nature-based solution? There are things we can do beyond just protecting them to manage them for climate risks. So that's one thing that very few countries actually look at in their NDCs. They might be looking at them, they're not stated in the NDCs. Jordan is one of those countries. I didn't see it in Grenada, but I'm sure that you're looking at that. It's such a great NDC. That's probably all I wanted to say because I know we're short on time and I want to make sure that we get to answer questions. But again, congratulations to both the speakers for their great NDCs. Both of those reports, we're sharing the links, I believe, so you'll have access to those. And those reports contain links to everybody else's reports. So you'll see everything all bunched together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel Plugger, who has been watching the stream for questions from participants and is going to facilitate our panel discussion. Daniel, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Rob, and thank you to our presenters so far for these very interesting inputs. And obviously, this has led to some interesting questions, and please keep them coming for the final 50 minutes. So reminder to the panelists and presenters, please keep your answers concise so that we can have some questions answered, which are in the Q&A section right now. There's one question which I think is a kind of a general question and might be addressed to all of you. And it's coming from Malte Timte, who's asking on how nature-based solutions can actually contribute to NDCs and especially then the link to national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and especially how trade-offs between nature-based solutions and NDCs can be avoided for biodiversity. I think this is a very interesting topic because it also touches a bit on definition of nature-based solutions. So I probably first will hand it to Sean, and then the others can jump into it.
I was hoping you didn't hand it to me, but I'll take it. Thank you. Yeah, so nature-based solutions has sort of exploded on the scene, and what we find is there's a lot of confusion over what it actually is, and a lot of people are using things that might technically be nature-based solutions, but aren't always the best thing to do for either climate or biodiversity. WWF, and I know a lot of our colleague organizations like Conservation International, TNC, GIZ, we're actually advocating the use of natural ecosystems over, monoculture forest plantations, for example, to actually maximize benefits maximize benefits for both biodiversity and climate. We think the same benefits for adaptation are realized if you use natural ecosystems rather than artificial ones. I also wanted to point out, people talked about integration, but Ahab in his presentation talked about the need for multiple adaptation solutions. He talked about engineered, natural, and hybrid, and that's really important too. NDCs, and nature-based solutions are great, but they can't solve all of our problems, and they need to be done in combination with those others types of methods. So I'm not sure if that totally answered the questions, but it allowed me to say a few things that I didn't get to say in my brief presentation. Thanks.
So yeah, anybody wants to add to this? Matthias, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think Sean mentioned correctly that nature-based solution is very broad term, really comprising a lot of ecosystem-based approaches. I think it is very important to look into what CBD has done with the ecosystem approach and its 12 principles. So really think about integrated management of land and seascapes, and that nature-based solutions should not only address human well-being, but also biodiversity benefits. So I think it's very important to look into safeguards and criteria for what NBS means on practical implementation. And it cannot be a good strategy, let's say, to focus on climate change mitigation adaptation actions that really put biodiversity at risk. I mean, this might be a short-term solution, certainly not a long-term one. So to give you a practical example, forest monocultures, they are really bad nature-based solutions because they do not address biodiversity, and it does not create a resilient system. Or planting mangrove in seagrass beds, or BECCS, the whole discussion about bioenergy and carbon capture and storage. So I think it's very important that countries that define those kind of safeguards, and a lot of work has been done on EBA safeguards, REDD+, the CBD ecosystem approach principles. So really, I think it's key to build on that.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Eyab also raised his hand, and after that, Maria.
Yes, thank you so much. I think Matthias has took one of the words that I have had before. So thank you, Matthias, for this very detailed description. Well, from my side, I would say that having a very good information at your side, a very good baseline, will help you a lot to understand how the nature-based solutions will contribute either to the NDCs and even to the NBSAP, because it's about to set out the activities that you consider priorities for your countries in a good time frame for implementation. So I don't want you to repeat the answer, so I would stop here saying that it's all about the baseline information. If you have it, then you can do all of the mainstreaming and the contribution that you are looking for.
Mm-hmm. I think that from the nature conservancy perspective, nature-based solution, it's an umbrella, and it could rely on a common outcome, but the objective could be different, and it depends on the information and where we wanted to focus on, because we can do natural climate solutions by focusing on mitigation and the carbon sequestration potential, but also we need, and I think that an important issue to differentiate in adaptation is that we need to address vulnerability information and vulnerability analysis. And in those cases, they are going to be clearly associated to the NDCs and to the adaptation measures, and it's going to be a protected area. If it is based on that information, is going to be different from other objectives that the plan of the conservation biodiversity could afford. So I think that it depends on how you manage the priorities of the territory of where you are working and the information that you are mainstreaming for nature-based solutions.
All right, so thank you, Maria. If nobody of the others wants to chip in, I would go to the next question. A very interesting one because it's not so often touched upon in the discussions of nature-based solutions and NDC, and it comes from Victoria Brezenyuk. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And she's asking, how can we increase the participation of indigenous peoples into the integration of nature-based solutions into NDCs, especially if the nature-based solution includes the conservation of customary indigenous lands? And I would like to give this answer first to Aria.
Aria, we can't hear you if you've unmuted. No.
Oh, unfortunately, we can't hear. Maggie, you raised your hand. Maybe Aria tries to sort out her problem and you can chip in.
Sounds great, thank you. And I am really eager to hear from Aria on this question, because I do think the country voices on this is going to be particularly interesting and important. But I just wanted to share that in our experience, it's important that Indigenous peoples and local communities are not just consulted as part of an NDC update process, but they're active contributors. That's really important. There may be traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples that could provide very helpful guidance and strategies for how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. But of course, that needs to be utilized in conjunction with their participation and input. And in the UN climate negotiations, there's the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform, which it has sort of three main goals. One is to incorporate Indigenous peoples' knowledge in the negotiations at a global level, but then to help build the capacities at the national level, as well as to create a platform for collecting this traditional knowledge. And so really engaging in that process and linking it to your NDC is a huge opportunity, and wonderful that that's becoming more advanced. But interested if Aria, no, we can't hear.
Unfortunately, we still can't hear you, Aria. Maria.
Yes, just very small. We have an experience here with the developing on life plans with the indigenous people. I think that including them in how to address zero deforestation goals in the Amazon region by their point of view and how they express that into their plans of life they wanted to build. And they in Colombia, they are also very important because there are the authorities there. So I think that that makes them a vision of how they can specifically address some of the NDCs that the government has and how their work in their territory are fulfilling that.
Yes, thank you, Maria. I don't know, Aria seems to be disconnected. No, unfortunately, we still can't hear you. So I probably would go to the next question, a very actual question, if Rob allows for it, and that it comes from Noah Magzadi, and he's asking. I would give this question then to Eab. On how do the NBS, the nature-based solutions, links to the COVID recovery in your country?
Yes, you know, this is a very important question, and thanks for sharing this or highlighting this. I think the most important part is how we can convince the policymakers and the decision makers that the ecosystem works and it should be conserved. I think this is one of the things that COVID-19 has, maybe it will have one of the advantages that we can now speak more loudly in front of them to advocate toward ecosystem and biodiversity. And we should all recognize that the nature-based solution should be included even in the post-COVID-19 economic recovery packages. So if we are speaking now about employment and how we can grow the employment, if we are speaking about the environmental degradation, the inequality, and all of this stuff, I think we need and we can now to highlight that this topic, the nature-based solution, is something that all governments worldwide they should consider carefully. So I hope this will answer the question. I know that the time is very limited, so I try to be very, very short.
Thank you, Eab. That was very insightful. Probably time for one more question, which I would give to Maria. And it's about the integration of climate science and information in designing successful nature-based solutions for a couple of ecosystems.
In 1 minute, yes, we have examples in Colombia on how we address vulnerability models for the Magdalena Cauca River and how we design with participatory and scientific information the ecosystem-based adaptations that we do. And also we are designing with the government the models of zero deforestation restoration and trees and agricultural lands pathways for the mitigation potential and how they can be included into the NDCs, baselines, and projects. So I can write more information about that, but there is some examples of the use of information on that.
Thank you, Maria. And then if Rob allows for another question, just stop me, otherwise I will go on and on. There's a question coming in from John Carlo, and he asks, presenters assume that nature-based solutions are effective, but how can nature-based solutions effectiveness really be measured in practice? Yeah, who wants to take this one?
And I'm trying again with a new pair
Aria,
of earphones.
you're back. Great.
I apologize. I changed the earphones. I apologize. I don't know what happened there. But just quickly, that's a really rich question. And I want to just share from our experience. We started with communities. Again, our environment division is very, very small. And so therefore, to make sure that we have an integrated approach to make sure that we have sustainability, we have to be good at engaging our communities, listening to what it is that they want, and then government's role has been to sort of technically help them to achieve that objective. So in that context, I want to just indicate that we had 3 very interesting projects where we worked, for example, one with fishermen, and the second one, the same RECCOMM project that I spoke earlier about, and a third one that I highlight with all 3 cases, we actually worked along with the community groups to identify suitable indicators to measure progress to the targets. And we were very lucky because we had a wonderful statistician on island who was able to sort of make it palatable so that in the identification of, for example, in the RECCOMM project, what would be suitable. It wasn't just how many planted, but we looked at things like how tall the plants were, very simple measures that could be done by the community members themselves. Number of leaves, diameter at breast height, all these things were, but the point is, it was discussed beforehand and they identified a suite that they could do. And it's relatively simple. You just write it down on paper, you go by every 2 to 3 weeks, you check upon it. So I think right at the inception, when you are discussing the problem, when you are starting to unpack how you're going to address this, it's really important that the community is present. They understand the efforts, and then they can actually contribute to the ongoing measures. And the identification of suitable indicators, a suitable suite of indicators to measure that progress that they could actually see and understand was really important in the ongoing monitoring. Again, with nature-based solutions too, we don't see something happen immediately. I mean, we're lucky with the mangroves because they grew so quickly that we were able to harvest the mangrove honey. But in general, you know, these things take time. With the coral restoration, it takes time, and therefore you have to have that kind of longer term investment at the community level, and that buy-in, which includes the indicators and observing over time how those indicators in a stepwise manner are changing, becomes very important.
All right.
Thanks
Great.
for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Aria. I think that was more or less answering 2 questions at the same time. I think we really need to wrap up. So, Rob, I hand the word back to you for some final remarks.
Thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me okay? Great. For a moment, I thought I had caught a little of Aria's mic trouble, but it's rare with one of these events that we make it all the way through without having a technical issue somewhere in it. So it's now part of the rhythm and flavor of any good online event. This has been an extraordinarily rich discussion, and I'm not going to try to summarize it fully. As several members of the speakers today pointed out, nature-based solutions are it's a very expansive term. It covers a lot of very diverse activities. That is in part one of its strengths, that it brings together so many facets of both human values and of broader ecological ones in ways that can enhance multiple aspects of our lives simultaneously. I think there's still a lot to do in terms of helping countries bring nature-based solutions into their work and mobilizing support that they need in order to make those effectively. And that goes around the world. I was very struck by Sean's point about the dismal ratings of the EU and the US, for instance, on nature-based solutions. And this is something in which learning really needs to flow in every direction. At the same time, we clearly have some really interesting and really inspirational examples of country leadership to point to. And we're very excited to be working with both Grenada and Jordan. Very grateful for the leadership that you're showing and for sharing the lessons that you're learning as you go through this process. But it's also something on which it's so expansive, so complex, so multifarious that there's going to be a constant need, I think, for us all to be learning from each other and to be figuring out new ways in which we can bring together the very diverse set of resources and of expertise that we can mobilize as a global community so as to drive these solutions effectively. So I'd like everybody on the call, please, to join me in thanking Arias and Louis, Ehab Eid, Margarita Gutierrez, Maggie Comstock, Matthias Bertram, and Sean Martin for sharing their expertise and their lessons and leadership today. Certainly, I've learned a lot. I'm very grateful both for your participation today and for the terrific work that you continue to do. Thanks very much for joining us, and we will be sharing all of the materials from this presentation with all participants, and we will share the details on that shortly. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, thank you.
Bye-bye.